As mentioned, our presenter and speaker for Thursday, October 13th, and for today, Aneesh Aneesh, exploring the future of global citizenship in a world of accelerated migration and displacement. I can't think of a more timely topic. Aneesh, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nancy. Glad to be here.
I think I had to do my homework on this a little bit, but I really enjoyed the topic. You are the author of Virtual Migration.
Yes.
And there we go. Somebody wants those tickets. I'm sure of it. Thank you for the call. 428-1393 is the number to call, and we do have those tickets, so they'll go fast this morning. People love what you're doing. You also coined a term, algocracy. Do I have that right?
That's right, algocracy.
And this is now being used widely on the internet, widely in circles around the world. You coined it.
That's right. I coined it, and actually, if you type it on the internet, on Google, you would see a lot of websites, but many of them don't even refer to me, which is I'm really glad about it, that the word has taken off. Both the term and the theory was developed by me more than 15 years ago. And it basically means that more and more of our lives are governed, and more governed by algorithms. And I kind of oppose it to the notion of bureaucracy, for example, rule of the office. As we know that when bureaucracy comes around in modern times, instead of people, positions started becoming more important. So, for example, instead of the actual individual presidents, the idea of the presidencies becomes more important. So that was bureaucracy, when positions take over and there's a hierarchical order that emerges. So every organization looks like a bureaucracy, whether it's a radio station or it's a university. But I came up with the term to see that we also see a lot of our lives are governed through these software platforms. And if you go, you want to do banking, there's a step-by-step process through which you can withdraw your money. So the mechanisms of governance and the governance style is mostly driven by software. Same with self-driving cars that are going to come into existence, right? So
self-driving cars.
That's right. So they'll be driven by algorithms of all kinds. So more and more, if you look around, almost everything, all is going to be governed by artificial intelligence, which is by algorithms. So that was the reason why I was looking at it as a different governance system compared to bureaucratic order that we have been living. And the bureaucratic order is not going to go away, but it's just a new layer of governance that's increasing.
For those of us, what is an algorithm?
Algorithm is a set of instructions that a computer you give. So if you want to, let's say, about someone's, if you have a huge database, and if you want to find out, let's say, people with a certain level of income between certain ages, certain demographics, you can produce a certain set of instructions, and they could be permanent instructions, they could be temporary instructions, and those instructions start. So for a self-driving car, the instruction would be, if it sees an object on the right side and an object on the left side, what maneuver it should do, it should make. Should the car avoid the passenger on the right and, let's say, collide into a wall on the right to save the passenger? So those are very difficult or ethical decisions that are going to be programmed into algorithmic instruction for the cars.
That's a whole other concept we could spend, I'm sure, a great deal of time on. The School for Advanced Research, you spent some time there and worked on a book, and you're back now to give a talk. You want to talk a little bit about your time there?
Oh, it was a magical year. That was more than a decade ago, in 2006 and 2007, exactly 10 years ago, actually. And that was my first time living for the whole year at 6,000 feet. And I recognized that combined with the Santa Fe's natural beauty and SAR, the School for Advanced Research, it was a year of contemplation. The mountains do have a certain calming effect, and so does SAR's campus. If people have visited, and if they haven't, probably they should. The School for Advanced Research, they have been doing really wonderful things over the years, and as you know, it's a very old institution, and I loved everything about it.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. You are a sociologist, and where are you working now?
I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I'm a professor of sociology, and I also direct the Center for International Education there.
Well, this is, as I mentioned, a very timely topic. We've been hearing an awful lot from those presidential candidates who would like to see a gigantic wall, built between borders. And we are also seeing some very sad times with Syrian refugees and others that are not just there, fleeing their countries because they're not safe, they're war-torn. There's a lot of pushback. People are getting elected based on their stance on immigration issues. We have a sheriff in Arizona who may be going to jail for his stance on that, and on and on. So what does it mean to be a citizen of the world as opposed to this nationalism that I certainly grew up with?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've always been citizens of the world since the world was discovered as a globe, as a sphere of closed communication, right? So we have been citizens of the world in that sense, and we use that term often to rise above the narrowness and the smallness of everyday, racial, religious, and other kinds of divides. But I mean by it something more than just a normative value. I think it's something that's already happening. See, if you go back to the formation of the nation states, what they did, they integrated really vast territories. Look at the United States or China or Russia. I mean, these are vast territories. And when you integrate at such a scale, you're going to eventually contain a lot of diversity by nature. You cannot have a homogeneous community of a village type. And again, see, nationalism harks back to those old, small, kinship-based communities, and so much of it, you can see the literature produced at SAR. But to gain that ideal at that scale is relatively impossible. We have to live with unfamiliar others, and that's the destiny. It cannot be undone. It cannot be reversed. There's no way to go back. You cannot create walls. You'll have to create literally walls between neighborhoods to be able to do that. So it is a global world in that real sense. And if you see, I think there is something called global citizenship emerging without the idea of a citizen. So you're not a citizen of some place, but you have citizenship wherever you move. So many studies have come out that talk about how human rights are displacing the idea or the source of citizenship. So if you see even non-citizens, for example, if you go to Germany and refugees, they have certain inalienable rights because of just being a human being. And that regime develops after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, the United Nations. And what we see is the development of human rights where one cannot, just by being a human, you have those rights, while national rights are usually exclusionary because, unless you are a citizen of the country, you cannot have those rights. So more and more what we are seeing is dual nationalities are emerging. So you have certain sets of rights, whether you are in the US or India or Germany. And that kind of multiple allegiance, a world of multiple allegiances, is something that I'm seeing, and that's the trajectory. So the whole idea now, the contradiction of nationalism is that it wants to build the small village community, which is impossible now. So what it might lead to is violence. And that's what we see, whether it's ISIS in the Middle East, they're trying to create some homogeneous caliphate, which is impossible, so people are fleeing. And what these dreams of purity results in actually more diversity because, there's more dispersion. People become more mingled. They're running away. They're going into and joining some other communities. So that's the world we have. So the world of walls is going to be relatively violent world, not necessarily physical violence, a lot of symbolic violence. Somehow we have to come up with alternative ideas of solidarity, which is not based on nationalism.
I just want to remind folks that one of our incentives today, if you're loving this as I am and you would like more of it, we have tickets, pairs of tickets for the School for Advanced Research lecture, which is happening tomorrow evening at 6:30, presenting our speaker today, Aneesh Aneesh, exploring the future of global citizenship in a world of accelerated migration and displacement. We have 5 pair, and we'd like for you to get those by calling 428-1393 and making your contribution. For a $25 contribution, you get 2 tickets to this great lecture. Do you see this And I say it, I keep bringing this up, but one of those premier things that I think rocked some people back and others, embraced it. But this idea of more walls, is it pushback to this concept that that's really just not the way the world is moving?
You're right. It does have its own seduction. See, for solidarity, humans have, and psychologists have talked about, there's always an insider and outsider kind of divide that there's clannishness that we all have. And that's why this idea is quite seductive. We all want to belong to a community. And the kind of modern republics do not have that. And they do offer through nationalism a sort of community of that kind. But eventually, we have to move above and move beyond it because there's the contradiction between republicanism, and I'm not talking about the Republican Party. Republicanism as a political concept is that you have an egalitarian community where people are voluntarily choosing to be citizens, right? So this idea of the voluntary association, that you're not forced to be part of so you're both the addressee as well as the author of the law. That means that's a very different concept than the particularism that we see where you inherit citizenship either by, in Latin we call it jus soli, by being born in a territory, right to the soil, and also jus sanguinis, which is right of blood. So these are very strong conceptions of citizenship that nation states have followed for a long time. But nation states have also followed naturalization and now dual citizenship. So new things are emerging. So this paradox and this contradiction between inheriting citizenship versus being the author and voluntarily choosing citizenship comes into contradiction, and you see a lot of conflict actually based on that. And that wavering between the two is always an issue. If you go back to, let's say, the Japanese internment during the Second World War, 2/3 of the Japanese were actually citizens of the United States, but they were still interned, partly because the U.S. as a state was wavering between the idea of Republican citizenship, which they were, and this essentialized nationhood, which somehow they did not pass the test for. So that contradiction results in often, some kinds of oppression, and you still see in the modern world. We are still dealing with this paradox of citizenship.
My guest this morning, Aneesh Aneesh, who will be the featured kickoff for the talks by the School for Advanced Research on Thursday. That's tomorrow night, October 13th. And we do have tickets to this great talk, and you'll get a chance to get up close and personal at 6:30 tomorrow evening for your $25 donation. You get a pair of tickets. And by calling us now, and please interrupt us, it's okay. We like to hear those phones jingle in the background. 428-1393, 428-1393. Aneesh, I'm always interested in what drives people for their passion, and you've certainly centered on a topic that I think has a tremendous amount of relevance right now. How did you come to this topic? How did you choose to research this and have this be your passion?
Yeah, I have always researched human movement of all kinds, and even the lack of human movement, why it is not occurring. So my first book was on virtual migration, where I discuss both the migration of programmers, software professionals to the U.S. from India. But I also looked at what I call virtual migration, which is they're not moving at all. The body is frozen into its own territory, but their skills and their symbolic labor is moving across nations. So a lot of global software development is done actually that way. If you look at any software, Adobe, Microsoft, they are at times, and actually more often than not, developed in multiple places at the same time, and they're integrated, in terms of modules on top of each other. So a team could be sitting in Beijing, in Bangalore, in India, in Arlington Heights in the U.S., and could be developing a piece of software. And that's what I call virtual migration. So that allows a different sets of negotiation of the national border, where the human body does not have to cross the border, and where the visas are checked and the rituals of passage are conducted. But here, a very different kind of borders emerge. They're mostly based on software platforms. So movement was always my passion. And then eventually that led to the studies of I did a little study of nationalism. Why is it that people are able to move or not move from one place to another? And that led me to the idea of citizenship. And what what excites me here that apart from nationalist imaginations of community that we have seen over the last century, we are seeing global imaginations of community. That is, from within the national social formation, there is a global social formation that's rising. And if you see Americans, going to disaster areas, helping people out, human rights, imaginations of human rights, and imaginations of diaspora, very new kind of, imaginations that are more global in nature are emerging.
Why is it? You just talked about that some people you said it, are frozen, and others actually do physically migrate. What are some of the factors involved with that? And just a reminder, if you want to get tickets to hear more from Aneesh Aneesh for Thursday night's talk, please call us now, 428-1393. It's 428-1393, and it's okay to interrupt us. We'd love to hear from you.
So, that's a very good question. I think some of it is related to the personality types of people. Some people are just want to move, and some people don't want to move. They want to stay put and be, in touch with the people around them. And there's nothing wrong with either of them. But I think the second part is also interesting. There is an institutional closure against movement. See, over the years, the states, and studies have, documented that, how the states have been sedentarizing people. They have been making people sedentary, for taxation purposes and all kinds of purposes. So they have the state has monopolized the authority over movement, right? So when the U.S., let's say, if you go to 1700s, there were 2 border patrol agents on either side of the border. Now we have probably more than 20,000 border patrol agents, right? There's something that happens with the rise of the nation state that starts having borders more strict and less passable. So some of the institutional closure is the reason why people are not moving as much as they might have with the global, transportation, new technologies, and all kinds of, imaginations that arise because of the incitement and as well as seduction of the media images and things like that.
How does this tie into economics? And I keep referring to the presidential debates and the arguments about open trade and NAFTA and all of these things. And I remember when our call centers went out of the country, and a lot of pushback from that. People, I can't understand. I don't know what to do. It's my credit card, or I'm calling my telephone service, and I don't know where I'm talking to. It seemed to rattle people. But I wonder if you can speak about that and also look ahead into the future. This seems to be the trend, a global universe.
That's right. There's a kind of global labor market that's already emerging, and some of my students, for example, are finding hard to get a job in the U.S., and they sometimes go to to Japan or China to teach and things like that. So, and there are websites that advertise jobs globally, and in academia, for example, in my field, you'll have Singapore, Australia, all advertising on the American Sociological Association's websites. So there is something global going on already. But the nation state does have to manage its economy, and that's where the problem occurs. See, the rise of the welfare state was one of the major accomplishments of capitalism, where there's a kind of compromise between capital and the state. Okay, in order to have a little bit of equality among people, let's tax you at a higher rate and give it to the poor people so that this kind of class conflict doesn't become, doesn't go out of hand. And that achievement led to an amazing, Western development, economic development. But what's happening with the globalization, that corporations are able to be taxed at a lower rate just by parking their money in some other country, and some shell corporations that they themselves create their subsidiaries in other countries, and as well as wealthy individuals who are, so how the state, all the state still has, enough money, enough taxation money. But how is the state able to then gain that taxation revenue to be able to mitigate inequalities that, that's very automatic, that arises out of the way our markets work. So that's the conundrum, and that's why we see the Panama Papers and a lot of things in recent years that have emerged as a scandal for the nation state.
As you, again, look ahead and think about your talk tonight, what do you hope people will walk away with for after hearing you speak?
I hope they walk away with the future that we are not just glimpsing, that's already here with us. The idea of multiple allegiances around the globe, that people, some things are already happening. People are actually even able to buy citizenship. Malta offers it for 650,000 euros. Plus 350,000 for buying some real estate. So those kind of citizenships, the U.S. started it all in 1990 with its EB-5 visa program, where if you invest $1 million and create 10 jobs at least, you're assured a green card, permanent residency in the U.S. So those kind of things are already emerging. So what I'm talking about, when I talk about global citizenship, it's not just a figment of imagination. It's not just because it feels nice. It's something real, and it's actually happening. And if that's the case, then we have to rethink our narrow allegiances. We might be forced to rise above our narrow allegiances.
And what would that look like?
So that would look like something like this. So if you are someone living in the U.S. and have never been abroad, then you may have resentment, for example, trade deals and all that. And trade deals could be badly written, and I agree with some of the politicians about that. But one has to be open to the idea that some of these trajectories are irreversible. But the communication can be, while the communication is open, but they can be closed off too. But that might result in certain adverse consequences. So I'm not talking about necessarily open borders or total free trade, because nation states, as I said, has to manage its population. But people have to start thinking that they may find community other than their own. They might be able to have constitutional patriotism. They might still respect the Constitution, but they should respect the Constitution when they move to Sweden, or if they go to Singapore. They have to respect the constitution of those lands as well. So the idea of parochial, small, closed sphere of communication as well as community is becoming, at least in theory, less and less tenable.
Fascinating topic. I'm sure people are going to want more, and I'm sure they were glued to the radio this morning. Aneesh Aneesh has been joining us, and School for Advanced Research. The lecture is Thursday. That's tomorrow night, October 13th, and I know you were listening, so now is the time to get those tickets as incentive for your donation. $25 donation, a pair of tickets by calling 428-1393. These are going to go fast. 428-1393. Call us now. Aneesh Aneesh, thank you for being here and sharing such great information. A lot to think about.
Thank you, Nancy.
Appreciate it. We'll be back with more Breakfast with Nancy right after this.